The opioid epidemic in South Carolina has impacted almost every level of our community. And for many addicts, they say their spiral into addiction started with a visit to a doctor's office. I talked to a former addict about how her journey with opioids started. Her arms and hands,
that's all scar,
remind her of how far she's come.
I kind of killed that vein for a while, both of these. For a while, so I was going in my hands.
This woman didn't want us to show her face or use her name, but she did want to share her story about how her addiction to opioids started.
We never knew something a doctor prescribed you could be a drug, nor your body could become dependent on it.
Like many addicts, she says she was introduced to opioids by a doctor.
You're a kid, you have a surgery, you get prescribed a controlled substance. In my case, it was Percocet, and I was young. And then another surgery right after that, another one right after that, all painkillers. And then, you don't know what withdrawals are because you never did drugs. And then it ruins your life.
She says her dependence on the drugs was fueled by an abusive relationship with a former boyfriend and a lack of education about how addictive opioids could be.
I wasted 10, 11 years of my life due to this, and it's something I didn't even ask for. It was something that was just kind of, that no one knew about, we weren't educated on, that you were prescribed, and then it led to, one thing led to the next, to the next.
And that next thing for her was buying stronger pain pills off the streets, then heroin and fentanyl.
It turns you into a completely different person. And it's really hard to look back at and think about the stuff you did.
Like using up until the 8th month of her pregnancy with her daughter.
I didn't want to give up the drugs. To me, what I had planned was that's how I was going to die. I was going to die at an early age. I already looked at myself and saw myself as a loser, saw myself once as being something and going places. But I thought I had already ruined my life. There is no changing it. I thought that everyone now views me as just some addict, trash, nothing. And it all changed the day I had her.
The woman we talked to says she's been clean now for 3 years, but the journey has not been easy. And while she's come such a long way, she says she can't get a job because of her criminal record, and she can't pay for a college education because she doesn't have a job. It's a cycle many people get stuck in, and she wanted to share her story because she knows she's not the only person out there dealing with this. Tonight at 11, I'll introduce you to the 7 local doctors who are in the top 1,000 prescribers of opioids to patients in the Medicare prescription program. Over a 3-year span, 7 doctors in our area wrote nearly 71,000 prescriptions for fewer than 13,000 elderly or disabled patients enrolled in the Medicare prescription program. Many of those doctors specialized in pain management in some respect, and as of just a week ago, all of their licenses with the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners were in good standing. We reached out to all of those doctors to get their take on these numbers, and we heard back from 3 of them who have very different perspectives on where we are today in the opioid epidemic and what role physicians play in this issue. We obtained this list of the top 1,000 prescribers of opioids nationwide in the Medicare Part D program and found that 7 of them practice medicine here in Horry and Florence counties. Dr. Scott Sawyer is at number 579 on that list. His website says he's provided pain management services to the Myrtle Beach area since 1999. In his opinion, we don't have an opiate crisis, but instead an addiction issue. In a written statement, he said, quote, "Addiction does not start in a doctor's office by and large. This is a common misconception perpetuated in order to inflate an anti-opioid agenda. The vast majority of addicted people started their addiction from illegally obtained prescription opioids. Most of the deaths attributed to opioid overdose is due to heroin or heroin and fentanyl overdose, not prescription opioids." He went on to say, pain patients who are not addicted and obviously benefit from monitored opioid prescriptions are being involuntarily tapered downward or off their beneficial pain medications. They are suffering inhumanely, and some are committing suicide. Through my investigation, though, I found prescription opioids do play a huge role in this overall epidemic. According to the Department of Health and Environmental Control, a majority of overdose deaths involving opioids in South Carolina have been caused by prescription opioids. Now, these numbers don't tell the whole picture, and we don't know where the user got the drugs. But in 2015, of the 566 opioid overdose deaths in our state, 512 of those involved prescription opioids, with only 95 being heroin. Those numbers went up in 2016. Of the 616 total opioid deaths, 550 were prescription-based and 108 were heroin. For some who are working on this problem at the state level, it's clear that doctors have played a role in where we are today with this epidemic.
There's a lot of evidence that, people that are now doing heroin and other drugs started with prescription opioid medications. We think, it's taken a while for us to get to this point. There's a lot of things that have happened over the past 20 years that I think have contributed to the problem. Practitioners and pharmacists were taught that pain was undertreated. Back in the 90s, pain was the 5th vital sign. And so there were a lot of things that kind of pushed maybe prescribers to put a lot of patients on opioids without all the precautions of addiction and worried about those kind of situations.
Dr. Jeffrey Wilkins echoed some of those same sentiments. He was the 2nd highest Medicare prescribing doctor of opioids locally between 2013 and 2015. He wrote 7,400 prescriptions for just over 1,500 patients during that time frame. But since then, he's gotten out of this type of pain management.
Patients with addiction and patients who are diverting have a very high motivation to fool you. And it can be a challenge to walk that line between being compassionate and helping fellow man in pain and not getting fooled.
Dr. Jeffrey Wilkins says he doesn't miss that kind of medical responsibility.
You spend a lot of time in that exam room looking at that person, not as someone coming and saying, I have high blood pressure, I have high cholesterol. You come to someone as, are they trying to pull something on me? And yet at the same time, your primary role as their doctor is to help them with their misery, and that double bind is just very difficult.
Through urine samples and pill counts, even criminal background checks, Dr. Wilkins said he vetted patients the best he could to make sure the pills he was prescribing were going to a patient who actually needed them. The liability, government restrictions, and high level of scrutiny are all reasons Dr. Wilkins said he and others have moved away from opiate prescriptions, and why he believes doctors like the ones on this list seem to be prescribing high amounts of those drugs.
Even our pain management guys don't want to do it. So you get an ever smaller and smaller number of people that feel comfortable enough to write opiates. Where when you print out a list of top providers, you see these people, holy cow, look at all the pain medicine the guys write. Well, it's because you're sort of the last guy standing.
Dr. Wilkins says not all patients know how they may be affected by the drugs their doctors prescribe.
You're generally not going to be addicted without exposure. You take an addictive personality, addictive genes, and exposure, and you are asking for trouble. And I guess the only way to completely avoid that is to never prescribe to anybody, which is just not humane.
Another doctor on that list of top 1,000 prescribers I heard from was Dr. Walter Evans, who ranked at number 981. In a letter to me, he said just last March, his practice terminated its controlled substance program due to the excessive administrative and financial burden of monitoring controlled substances being required by the DEA and SCDHEC, and not due to restrictions or limitations placed on his license. He went on to say, "I've witnessed the devastation in my patients' lives caused by the restrictive and heavy-handed policies of the DEA. Now, instead of giving these patients narcotic prescriptions which allowed them to lead active lives, I am prescribing wheelchairs and other assistive devices to help them stay out of a nursing home. I grieve for those victims of the current opioid epidemic, but I also grieve for my patients, whose quality of life has been sacrificed by the DEA because of their inability to control illegal drugs." Now, you can see a list of all 7 of those doctors from our local area in this story on our website, WMBFnews.com. Just click the WMBF Investigates tab. In the studio, Caitlin Stansel for WMBF News.